Let us begin with a prayer. Oh God, help us to see and hear what Jesus is doing among us. Abide with us as we abide with you in this time of reflection. Amen. This is my favorite Sunday in Advent, primarily because we get to light the pink candle. People ask me, why do we light the pink candle on the third Sunday in Advent? Because sometimes there's a little disagreement about that. And my answer is Google it. Just Google it. You'll find out. Because I have no idea, but I love the fact that we get to light the pink candle. Seriously, this is the Sunday we focus on joy. So that ought to be reason enough to make it your favorite Sunday, right? It's a day of happiness. And so the question is, what is it that brings us happiness and joy? What is that? I think most of us would answer people. People are a source of great joy in our lives, sometimes. I agree with something I read the other day that said, some people bring joy wherever they go. Others bring joy whenever they go. Let me introduce my series for Advent, especially since many of you did not get to hear what I did last Sunday, because I was only able to do it during the first service. The title of my series is Venting at Advent. To vent, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, is to give free expression to a strong emotion about something that, quite frankly, is robbing us of our joy and our happiness. And I expounded the last 2 weeks on some of the more critical themes that bothered some of the biblical writers. We've especially focused on the prophet Isaiah and also the Apostle Paul. So Isaiah, we heard Isaiah vent eloquently and poetically against war and against violence. And that was on the first Sunday in Advent. And then on Advent 2, we heard him vent against inequities between the powerful and the vulnerable. And obviously, these are things that continue to haunt human societies. We also heard Paul do a fair amount of venting. On Advent 1, we heard him vent against spiritual laziness, which he claims can lead to spiritual darkness. And then last week, we heard him vent against disharmony among God's children. And the big issue in that day was obviously between Jews and Gentiles. And Paul became the great missionary, an elite Jew, but he became the missionary to the Gentiles. And goes without saying that we continue to suffer from spiritual laziness and also from disharmony among God's children in many, many different ways. Well, then last week, for good measure, we allowed I guess we call him the fanatical John the Baptist to vent against the spiritual fruitlessness that he saw in the temple-based religion in Jerusalem. And he said the only fruit that they're bearing is rotting fruit. And then I asked you, those who were listening to me, to consider how the institutional expression of our faith might be producing rotting fruit as well. In other words, it's not good fruit, it's bad fruit. So all those are questions to deal with. As I noted a couple of weeks ago, religion, one way to look at religion is it is humanity's venting, even if you're not angry at the time, but we are always, through our faith, venting about things in the world that we are not happy about, things that are stealing our joy. Have you ever wondered what religion was back in the very beginning? The very first religious expression among Homo sapiens? There's a lot of speculation about it, but if you go far enough back in history to the beginning of religion, some religious expression, What you're going to find is people who were suffering a great deal. They were suffering from illnesses, very brief lifespans, infertility, high mortality rates for both newborn babies and also for mothers who had given birth. And when agriculture became a thing, then there was what you might call infertility in terms of animals, livestock, and also crops. They didn't have all the modern techniques that we have today, so it was a real struggle to do anything agriculturally and make a profit and be successful. So you had all that going on in the ancient world. Things that happen today, but much worse. So according to many religious historians, the earliest expressions of religious faith in the human species were aimed at those particular problems. In fact, fertility goddesses may have been the very first expression or acknowledgement of some religious deity, some spirit world that is helping the physical or material world. Nevertheless, the purpose of these goddesses or the gods, whatever they might have been, was to bring joy to situations where joy had been robbed, where joy had been lacking. So among other things, religion is communal and institutional venting against things or about things that rob us of our joy. Which begs the question, what is it that brings us joy? Now, I can't speak for all of you, so I'll just speak for myself. Here's what brings me joy. Number one, my job. I thought I would lead with that. I really love this vocation, and what I most enjoy about this vocation is the opportunity to get to know a lot of people over the years. Wherever, because people bring us great joy, right? Wherever they go or whenever they go, people bring us great joy. The other thing I really like about this vocation is the preaching aspect of it, because it's a creative outlet, and everyone needs a creative outlet. If you don't have a creative outlet, I suggest that you look for a creative outlet. And likewise, writing brings me a lot of joy, whether it be for my sermons or those weird Ferguson Times articles that I write, or just my other writing projects. So that brings me joy. And although my family is as dysfunctional as your family is, I cannot ignore the fact that my wife, children, and grandchildren, and my larger extended family, overall they add more joy to my life than they managed to take away. The ledger so far is in their favor, and I can only hope that for them my ledger is also in my favor, that I add more joy to their lives than what I subtract. Life is full of many different smaller, less important ways that we learn to find joy in our lives. Most of us find ways to do so, whether it simply be watching ball games or bird watching or whatever. We find a way to bring joy to our lives. So the counter question then to all this is, what is it that robs us of our joy? What is it that makes us vent? Because we vent against things that do that rob us of our joy and happiness. I think if I did a survey and say, what are your top 5, top 10 things that rob you of your joy? I think I know what the number one answer would be. It would be illness, sickness, disease, injury, physical or mental in any form for you or for your loved ones. So whether we're talking about illnesses or injuries that lead to our ultimate demise, health and well-being is probably our most pressing concern. We talked about this one Monday night in our study about how, because we live in a relatively prosperous society, we don't have and we have, we have a fair amount going for us. We don't have a lot of the concerns that other people do, to the extent they do. But therefore, but we do have health issues, because bad health is no respecter of persons, right? We never know when that's going to hit us or a loved one. So that's our most pressing concern. And to support what I'm saying, just take a look at our list of prayer concerns, or your own list, your own prayer list. Are not health issues for yourself or others at the top of your list of prayer concerns? If I ask you, as I have in the past, what are some prayer concerns out there? 95% of the responses will have to do with health and well-being. So even in a world that enjoys advanced medical technology and healthcare institutions like we've never experienced before, we continue to vent about health issues, whether it be our healthcare system, about the high cost of insurance, or medicine, prescriptions, or any number of things. If we've been through the health system, we are probably going to vent about something. Again, as I said on the first Sunday in Advent, prayer is a form of venting. It may not be the only thing you do when you pray, but there will be some venting, whether there's anger attached to it or not. You will vent in some way. And we vent in prayer about things that we want to see changed or transformed. So when we come together to pray, whether in public or in our own private lives, again, I'm saying health concerns are at the very top of our prayer agendas. So if this is true for us today, with all of our good medicine and surgical techniques and all that, if it's true for us today, imagine how true it was for people who lived in the distant past, when few people lived to what we would call a ripe old age, when medicine consisted of unproven herbs from the garden, I imagine, or when surgery could be performed by a local butcher. And I hate to be morose about it, but that's basically what happened. The prophet Isaiah was very much in touch with what robbed his people of their joy, including physical ailments. So here's a case in point. In our reading today from the 35th chapter of Isaiah, this is written within the context of the Jews who are about to return home from exile in Babylon. So they've been there for a few decades, or that's when their ancestors came. And now the Persians, the Medes and the Persians have gone in, they've conquered the Babylonians, and they've turned to all the people who had been in exile and said, you can go home. And so now they get to go home if they want to. But imagine their concerns. Here they are, they're about to embark on this long, treacherous journey that will take them through a very harsh wilderness. And obviously they're afraid. So Isaiah encourages those who have a fearful heart to be strong and fear not, which is easier said than done. Now, if only young adults with good health, good bones, got working muscles, working knees, and sturdy hiking boots, if it was that crowd that was about to embark on this journey through the wilderness from Babylon to Jerusalem, then the concerns would be less. But that's not the case. What I want to argue, this is likely a relatively older crowd. Maybe for them, it'd be middle-aged for us, but it was an older crowd. You remember this happened, the exile happened decades earlier, and so it's unlikely that few, if any, of the original exiles were still around when they were told they could go back home. And so, but doesn't it make sense to think that those whose parents whose ancestors had made that journey decades earlier were the ones who told their children about the glories of Zion and Jerusalem. Doesn't it make sense to think that these are the people who have now grown up, that they are the most excited because they heard the stories when they were children. They are most excited and determined to go home. I think that's who went, basically. Again, would be more for middle age for us, but older for that time period. They're going home. But unfortunately, advanced age brings more physical ailments. Can any of you attest to that? Has the ailment scale gone up as you've gotten older? I know it has for me. As I like to say, old age is not for sissies. And so knowing this, the prophet tries to encourage them, knowing their concerns, with hope of health and well-being. Now, he may be offering them a little bit of, we might even call it false hope. Sort of like, hey, there's going to be a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or it's going to be Ponce de Leon's fountain of youth. That's what you're going to find. But in a world with no medicine to speak of and no advanced surgical techniques, they didn't have anything else but hope. He had to inspire them some way to feel like they could make that journey. He wants to help them find joy in their predicament. And so this is what he promises them. Quote, "Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened." You know, they didn't have ophthalmologists back then. There were a lot of people with eyesight problems. "And the ears of the deaf unstopped." They didn't have hearing aids. "Then the lame shall leap like a deer." You couldn't get your knee replaced back then. "And the tongue of the speechless," maybe people had strokes or whatever, "sing for joy." For joy. Again, he's trying to bring joy to their predicament, which is going to be a tough predicament. So fast forward about 600 years, John the Baptist is in prison. And he's hearing rumors about Jesus of Nazareth, perhaps his former protege, who is, people say, fulfilling Isaiah's promises. John's sincere hope is that Jesus is indeed the one that his people have been waiting for. And so Jesus answers through a messenger. "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight. The lame walk. The lepers are cleansed. The deaf hear. The dead are raised. And the poor have good news brought to them." There were 6 points there. Notice that the first 4 all relate to physical well-being. The 5th one has to do with mortality. The dead are raised. And the 6th one has to do with economic well-being. It was pretty obvious what their prayer list would have looked like to them. So my point is, never stop venting about anything that robs humanity of its joy, especially problems with health and well-being. The human body is fragile and mortal, and because of that, joy is often elusive. And so vent. Vent for yourself, vent for others. And let us continue to create a world where the blind are able to see, the deaf can hear, the lame can walk, and the sick are cured. Likewise, let us continue to create a world where violence is diminished, economic inequities are addressed, disharmony among God's children is a thing of the past, and spiritual laziness and fruitlessness are overcome. Let us bring joy wherever we go. Amen.